Take a close look at the stunning blue of this tile. It's not just a color. It's a mystery that's captivated art historians for centuries. This vibrant hue, known as Iznik blue, holds a secret that modern science still struggles to fully replicate. Across mosques and palaces from Istanbul to Jerusalem, these magnificent tiles have maintained their brilliant colors through wars, earthquakes, and the relentless passage of time, while modern reproductions fade within decades. How did 16th century Ottoman artisans achieve what our advanced technology cannot? What hidden knowledge allowed them to create colors that seem to capture and hold light itself? This isn't just a question about pigments and pottery. It's a doorway into a lost world of artistry, alchemy, and spiritual significance. The artisans of the Ottoman Empire didn't merely decorate walls. They encoded entire cosmologies into ceramic, weaving mathematics, mysticism, and master craftsmanship into patterns that still speak to us across 500 years. Each tile tells a story of trade routes that stretched from China to Venice, of palace workshops where techniques were guarded like state secrets, and of artists who signed their work with hidden symbols rather than names. Join me on a journey to unravel one of history's most beautiful mysteries. We'll explore how these tiles were made, why their colors remain so vivid, and what hidden messages might be concealed within their intricate patterns. You'll discover how fire, earth, and human ingenuity combine to create artworks that defy time itself, and how modern researchers are finally beginning to decode secrets that were nearly lost forever. This is more than an art history lesson, and it's a detective story written in cobalt and quartz, and by the end, you'll never look at a ceramic tile the same way again. To understand the brilliance of these tiles, we must first travel back to a time before the Ottoman Empire even existed, to the artistic world of the Seljuks of Anatolia. This earlier civilization, with its deeply spiritual and mathematical view of the universe, didn't just make art, they built a visual language of faith and philosophy out of clay. Their designs were predominantly geometric, intricate interlocking stars, complex polygons, and endless knots that symbolize the infinite nature of God. Walking into a Seljuk building was like stepping into a celestial diagram, where every line and angle was a calculated reflection of a divine, orderly cosmos. Their color palette was more restrained, often relying on a deep turquoise and purple against a plain terracotta background, but the skill was undeniable. They established the entire technical and artistic foundation, the kilns, the clay mines, the guilds of artisans, upon which the Ottoman masterpiece would later be built. The real transformation began not with a slow evolution, but with a single earth-shattering event: the conquest of Constantinople in 1453 by Sultan Mehmed II, known to history as Mehmed the Conqueror. This wasn't just a military victory, it was a massive cultural statement. The new Ottoman rulers, now in control of the magnificent former capital of the Byzantine Empire, were determined to leave their own indelible mark. They didn't want to just build structures. They wanted to create a new visual identity for a burgeoning empire. This demanded an art form that was distinctly Ottoman, one that could convey power, permanence, and divine favor on an unprecedented scale. The existing Seljuk geometric style, while respected, was seen as belonging to a previous era. The new imperial vision called for something more lush, more naturalistic, and more openly glorious. This is where imperial patronage became the rocket fuel for artistic innovation. Sultans like Mehmed the Conqueror and later Suleiman the Magnificent didn't just fund the arts, they actively directed them. They established imperial workshops in the palace itself, attracting the greatest ceramicists, chemists, and designers from across the empire and beyond. These artists were given a mandate: create something new, and they did. They began to look beyond the borders of Anatolia, drawing inspiration from the delicate floral patterns of Chinese porcelain brought along the Silk Road and the flowing natural forms seen in Persian manuscripts. The rigid geometry of the Seljuks began to soften, unfurling into the glorious botanical designs we associate with Ottoman art today: tulips, carnations, hyacinths, and roses. These weren't just pretty decorations. In the Ottoman cultural language, each flower held deep symbolic meaning. The tulip represented God, as the letters in the Arabic word for tulip, lail, are the same as those in the word Allah. The rose was a symbol of the Prophet Muhammad. So, a wall covered in these tiles was more than a beautiful surface. It was a blooming garden of devotion, a permanent expression of faith that would never wilt or fade. This shift from the abstract, intellectual geometry of the Seljuks to the naturalistic, spiritual florals of the Ottomans marked the birth of a truly imperial art form. It was an art that spoke not just of conquering armies, but of a sophisticated, confident civilization that saw itself as the center of the world, and its art as a reflection of paradise on earth. But this grand imperial vision needed a physical home, a place where the raw materials, skilled hands, and innovative spirit could all converge. That place was Iznik. You might know it by its ancient name, Nicaea, the site of two major ecumenical councils in the early Christian church. But for the Ottoman Empire, it became something entirely different: the undisputed heart of ceramic production, a Renaissance workshop on an industrial scale. Its rise to prominence wasn't an accident. It was a perfect convergence of geography and opportunity. Nestled on the eastern shore of Lake Iznik, the town sat atop some of the richest and purest quartz-rich clay deposits in the region. This wasn't just any mud. This was a specific, fine-grained, bright white clay that formed the perfect, luminous canvas for the vibrant colors to come. Just as important was its location: a strategic crossroads on major trade routes, connecting the capital in Istanbul to the riches of Anatolia and beyond. This allowed for a constant flow of not just goods, but ideas. Artisans and chemists, called ustas, flocked to Iznik, drawn by imperial patronage and the chance to work with such superior materials. They established hundreds of workshops, or ateliers, each often specializing in one part of the complex process. One workshop might focus solely on refining the clay, another on painting the designs, and another on the critical alchemical firing in massive kilns. The town became a buzzing hive of innovation, a place where a potter could walk down the street and consult with a master chemist about a new glaze formula, or where a designer could see the latest imported Chinese porcelain that had just arrived on a caravan from the East. This constant cross-pollination of skills was essential. The creation of these tiles was never the work of a single genius artist. It was a symphony of collaboration. The designer, the calligrapher, the clay preparer, the painter, and the kiln master all had to work in perfect harmony. A single mistake by any one of them, an impurity in the clay, a miscalculation in the pigment mix, even a few degrees of temperature in the kiln could ruin weeks of meticulous work. Life in Iznik revolved around this ceramic heartbeat. The skyline was dominated by the distinctive chimneys of the bottle-shaped kilns, constantly burning oak wood to reach the incredibly high temperatures required. The air would have been thick with the smells of wood smoke, baking clay, and the sharp, mineral scent of crushed quartz and pigments. The sound of hammers crushing stone into fine powder, the rhythmic turning of potters' wheels, and the quiet concentration of painters bent over their detailed work would have formed the town's soundscape. For nearly 2 centuries, Iznik wasn't just a town that made tiles. It was a town that was tiles, its entire economy and identity intertwined with the creation of these ceramic masterpieces. It was here, in this unique ecosystem of art and science, that the elusive secret of Iznik blue was finally captured and perfected, turning a small lakeside town into a legend. This brilliant white canvas didn't just appear by chance. It was the result of a meticulously guarded secret that began deep underground, in the quarries surrounding Iznik. The master potters, the ustas, knew that their entire art form depended on one thing above all else: the unique snow-white clay found only in this specific region. This wasn't the common red or brown clay used for simple pottery. This was a special, quartz-rich deposit, formed by ancient geological events that left behind a layer of exceptionally pure, fine-grained material. The exact locations of these clay beds were precious secrets, passed down from master to apprentice within families and workshops. To reveal a source was to give away a competitive advantage that had taken generations to perfect. So these quarries were protected as fiercely as any state secret. The journey from raw earth to a workable clay body was a long and physically demanding process. Once extracted, the clay had to be purified. It was first left out in the open air to weather for months, even years. Exposure to sun, rain, and frost would naturally break down organic matter and allow soluble salts to leach out, preventing imperfections and bubbles from forming later during firing. After this patient aging, the clay was slaked, mixed with water in large pits to create a slurry. This liquid clay was then passed through a series of progressively finer sieves, often made of silk, to remove every last pebble, twig, or impurity. The cleaned slurry was then left to settle, the water slowly evaporating or being drained away until the clay reached the perfect, plastic consistency for shaping. But the true magic of this clay wasn't just its whiteness. It was its astonishing quartz content, which could be as high as 80 or 90%. When a shaped tile was placed into the searing heat of the kiln, something extraordinary happened. The quartz particles within the clay body would begin to vitrify, fusing together into a glass-like translucent matrix. This process created a surface that was incredibly smooth and slightly luminous, as if the tile had a faint inner light. This was the crucial alchemical transformation. That luminous, vitrified quartz background acted like a prism, reflecting and amplifying the colors painted upon it. The famous cobalt blue didn't just sit on the surface. It was embraced by this glowing white foundation, making it appear more vivid, more saturated, and more deeply radiant than any color applied to a dull, opaque surface ever could. The clay itself was the first and most important ingredient in the recipe for immortality, providing a stage of light that allowed the colors to perform a symphony for the eyes. And yet, even the most perfect white canvas is nothing without its star performer, the color that became the very signature of the Ottoman Empire, that breathtaking, profound cobalt blue. This was no ordinary pigment. Its story begins not in the workshops of Iznik, but in the arid, mountainous mines of Kashan in Persia, and as far away as Afghanistan. Securing this raw material was an imperial endeavor, a matter of statecraft and long, perilous trade routes. The mineral they sought was a specific, rare ore rich in cobalt, often traveling for months by caravan, its value so immense it was traded like precious gems. This wasn't just a colored rock. To the Ottomans, it was solidified sky, a piece of the divine waiting to be unlocked. The symbolic weight of this color cannot be overstated. In the spiritual and artistic language of the Islamic world, blue was the color of the cosmos, the infinite vault of heaven, a representation of truth, contemplation, and the divine presence. To cover a sacred space, the interior of a mosque, the dome of a mausoleum in this celestial blue was to create a microcosm of paradise on earth, a space that lifted the eyes and the soul upward. It was a color reserved for the most significant imperial projects, a visual declaration of the sultan's power and piety. Its cost and difficulty of production only enhanced its prestige, making it the ultimate royal color. But raw cobalt ore is a dull, dark, almost blackish rock. Transforming it into a pigment capable of producing that legendary vibrancy was a complex alchemical process guarded with intense secrecy. First, the masters of the workshop, the ustas, would carefully select the highest grade ore. This raw material was then heated in a process called calcination, which helped to burn off impurities and make the ore more brittle. Then came the most critical and laborious stage, grinding. Using a heavy stone mortar and pestle, apprentices would spend days, sometimes weeks, patiently grinding the calcined ore into an impossibly fine powder. This step was everything. If the powder was too coarse, it would create a gritty, uneven color that could even blister during firing. But if it was ground to the perfect, velvety consistency, it would melt seamlessly into the glaze, creating that famous, deep, luminous, and perfectly even blue. The final, brilliant deception of Iznik blue lies in its chemistry. When applied to the tile, the cobalt paste actually looks a pale, unimpressive grayish black. The miracle happens only inside the inferno of the kiln, at temperatures exceeding 1200 degrees Celsius. At that peak heat, the quartz-based glaze melts into a glassy layer, and the cobalt particles dissolve into it. As the kiln cools, the glaze solidifies, trapping the cobalt ions within its glassy matrix. This is why the color is so permanent. It isn't a layer of paint on the surface that can be scratched or worn away. The blue is literally frozen inside the glass, making it incredibly resistant to fading, even after centuries of exposure to sun and weather. The master kiln operator held the final key, his experience telling him exactly when to starve the kiln of oxygen to intensify the blue, a final delicate maneuver in a process that was equal parts science, art, and magic. Yet for all the dazzling supremacy of Iznik blue, a different color presented the master potters with their most vexing and ultimately tragic challenge. A fiery, translucent red so vibrant, it was compared to fresh blood or sealing wax. This remarkable hue, derived from a special iron-rich clay known as Armenian bole, became the holy grail of the Iznik workshops. Unlike the reliable cobalt blue, which could be controlled through meticulous grinding and firing, this red was a capricious, almost living element. Its creation was the pinnacle of an usta's skill, a delicate dance with chemistry and flame that often ended in failure. The process began, like so many of their materials, with a specific and precious substance quarried from the earth. Armenian bole was a distinctive clay, colored a deep, rusty red by its exceptionally high concentration of iron oxide. Sourced from specific deposits, this raw material was carefully prepared and ground into a fine pigment, but its behavior was entirely unlike the stable cobalt. The immense difficulty lay in the firing process. To achieve its legendary brilliance, the red glaze had to be fired at a very specific, narrow temperature range within the kiln's inferno. If the heat was even slightly too low, the iron particles would not fully melt into the quartz glaze, resulting in a dull, muddy brownish red that was a shadow of its intended glory. However, if the temperature crept even a fraction too high, the iron would vaporize and simply disappear from the surface entirely, leaving behind a ghostly, clear glaze where the vibrant red design was meant to be. This catastrophic failure was a constant threat, turning weeks of painstaking work into a worthless, transparent blank. Mastering this color required an almost supernatural feel for the kiln's atmosphere, a sixth sense possessed by only the most experienced masters. They learned to read the subtle color of the flames and the sound of the fire to judge the exact moment to begin cooling, a decision that could make or destroy a masterpiece. For a glorious period in the 16th century, they achieved the impossible, surviving tiles from this golden age showcase this triumphant red alongside the famous blue, often used for delicate flower petals or intricate detailing, creating a stunning visual contrast. The success was short-lived, however. As the 17th century wore on, the political and economic stability of the Ottoman Empire began to falter. Imperial patronage for the lavish tile-making projects dwindled, and the intricate network of trade that supplied rare materials like Armenian bole fractured. The master ustas, their workshops closing one by one, could no longer afford the endless experimentation and costly failures required to perfect this temperamental color. The precise, alchemical knowledge of how to handle the bole, the exact grind, the specific clay blend, the critical firing temperature wasn't written down in any manual. It existed only in the hands and minds of the artists, passed down through generations of practice, with no new apprentices to teach and no commissions to justify the expense. This fragile chain of wisdom was broken. The secret didn't vanish in a single moment. It faded, forgotten like an ember dying for lack of fuel. Today, this lost red is the telltale sign of a genuine, peak-period Iznik tile. Modern chemists can analyze the composition and know it is Armenian bole, but they cannot replicate the exact firing technique that gave it its unique depth and translucency. Contemporary reproductions can create a red, but it is often opaque, more of a rusty paint than a glowing jewel. The original formula is gone, a silent testament to the fact that some arts are not just about ingredients, but about the irreplaceable touch of a master's hand. The rarity of tiles featuring this true red makes them among the most coveted treasures in the world of art collection. Each one a frozen moment of brilliance from a time when fire and earth yielded a color that modern science still cannot reclaim. While the quest for the perfect red represented one frontier of the Iznik master's craft, their full palette relied on a symphony of colors, each with its own extraordinary origin story. Beyond the legendary cobalt blue, two other hues stand out for their brilliance and the vast distances they traveled: a vivid emerald green and a deep, luminous ultramarine derived from the precious stone lapis lazuli. These were not local earth tones. They were global commodities, and their presence in a small Anatolian town is a testament to the immense reach and influence of the Ottoman Empire. The vibrant green that brings leaves and stems to life on the tiles was born from a surprising and volatile source: copper. The artisans would take scraps of copper metal, or more commonly, malachite ore, and subject it to a process of roasting and grinding to create various copper oxides. When this green-tinted powder was mixed with the lead-based glaze and fired, it would melt into a stunning, translucent emerald. However, much like the iron red, copper green was a notoriously fickle partner. Its final appearance was entirely at the mercy of the kiln's atmosphere. In an oxygen-rich environment, it would produce its classic bright green, but if the kiln master reduced the oxygen, creating a smoky reduction atmosphere, the same copper could flash to a deep blood red or even a metallic sheen. Controlling this required immense skill, turning each firing into a high-stakes performance where chemistry and fire collaborated, or conspired, to determine the final masterpiece. Even more extraordinary than the green was the arrival of true ultramarine blue. This was a color of almost mythical status, painstakingly extracted from the brilliant blue lapis lazuli stone, which for centuries could only be found in a single remote source, the Sar Isang mines in the mountains of modern-day Afghanistan. The process to create the pigment was incredibly labor-intensive. The raw lapis stone had to be carefully sorted. Only the deepest blue pieces, devoid of golden pyrite flecks or white calcite veins, were selected. These choice fragments were then ground into a fine powder and mixed with a special paste of wax, oils, and resins. This mixture was then kneaded in a weak lye solution. As artisans worked the paste, the incredibly fine, valuable blue pigment particles would separate from the impurities and transfer into the liquid, which could be collected and dried. It could take weeks of processing to yield just a few ounces of this priceless blue powder. The journey of these raw materials to Iznik is a narrative of empire. Vast camel caravans, organized and protected by Ottoman authority, would trek along the ancient Silk Road, bringing lapis from Afghanistan and copper from mines across Anatolia and beyond. This was more than just a supply chain. It was the circulatory system of a thriving culture, pumping not only pigments but also ideas, artistic influences, and wealth across continents. The ability to command such resources and attract such luxuries was a direct projection of imperial power. By using ultramarine blue, a pigment so expensive it was often reserved for the robes of the Virgin Mary in European Renaissance paintings, to decorate entire mosque walls, the sultans were making an undeniable statement about their wealth, their piety, and their access to the farthest corners of the known world. Every tile shimmering with these colors was a map of trade routes and a bill of sale from a global superpower. Even with the perfect clay and the most precious pigments, the true soul of an Iznik tile was breathed into it not by chemistry, but by the human hand. This moment of creation happened in the underglaze painting phase, a nerve-wracking, high-stakes procedure where a single misplaced brushstroke could doom weeks of collective labor. Before the tile ever saw the inside of a kiln, the designer, or nakash, would first transfer the intricate pattern onto the smooth, white, bisque-fired surface. This was often done by pricking the outline of the design onto a paper cartoon and then dusting charcoal powder through the tiny holes, leaving a faint, dotted guide on the clay canvas, a ghost of the masterpiece to come. Then the painter took over. These artists were the elite of the Iznik workshops, possessing a combination of artistic genius, immense concentration, and a steady hand that would make a surgeon envious. They worked with a range of specialized brushes, each a masterpiece of craftsmanship in its own right. The finest of these were often made from hair plucked from the neck of a kitten, chosen for its incredible softness and ability to form a perfect, needle-sharp point. These were not broad, sweeping brushes for bold strokes. They were delicate instruments designed for the impossibly thin, flowing lines that define Iznik art. Holding one of these brushes, an artist would dip it into a thick, paste-like slurry of the precious ground pigment, mixed with a little water and a binding agent like gum arabic. The application itself was an act of incredible precision and speed. The painter had to lay down the design with confident, continuous strokes, as going back over a line to correct it or fill it in would result in a clumsy, uneven buildup of pigment that would be glaringly obvious after firing. There was no undo button, no way to erase a mistake on this porous clay surface. Every twisting vine, every delicate petal, every intricate leaf had to be executed perfectly on the first attempt. This required not only technical skill, but a deep meditative focus, a complete absorption in the flow of the pattern. The painters were often working on a large commission of dozens or even hundreds of tiles that all needed to match perfectly, making their consistency across weeks of work a testament to their supreme discipline. The entire process was a beautiful paradox. They were painting with dark, muddy pastes, gray-black cobalt, rusty red iron, dull green copper onto a pale surface, with no true idea of how the final, glorious colors would turn out. They were working blind, guided entirely by experience and faith, trusting that the alchemy of the kiln would transform their careful, monochrome outlines into a burst of permanent, jewel-like color. It was the ultimate act of artistic faith, a collaboration between human intention and elemental transformation, where the master's brush began a sentence that the fire would finish. After the final brushstroke was laid down and the intricate design sat waiting in dull, monochrome tones, the most critical and dangerous phase of the entire operation began. The fragile, painted tiles were carefully loaded into the massive, bottle-shaped kilns that dotted the skyline of Iznik, structures that were the very engines of this ceramic miracle. These were not simple ovens. They were sophisticated instruments of transformation, each firing a carefully orchestrated gamble where weeks of labor and priceless materials could be either perfected into immortality or instantly vaporized into worthless slag. The master kiln operator, the usta, was the conductor of this fiery orchestra, a figure who wielded immense respect and responsibility. His expertise, gained through decades of experience and closely guarded secrets passed from father to son, was the only thing standing between a masterpiece and a catastrophe. The process was a two-act play of fire, each with a distinct and vital purpose. The first firing, known as the biscuit or bisque firing, was a relatively low-temperature affair. Its goal was modest but essential: to take the fragile, dried clay tiles and turn them into a sturdier, porous ceramic body that could withstand the handling required for painting and glazing. This initial bake hardened the clay just enough, like a piece of chalk, making it the perfect absorbent surface to hold the painter's pigments without blurring or running. Once painted, the tiles were then dipped into a vat of the secret quartz-based glaze mixture, which dried to a cloudy, opaque white, completely obscuring the designs beneath. To an observer, it would have looked like the artists had just ruined their own work, covering their intricate patterns with a milky film. The second firing was where the true, breathtaking alchemy occurred. This was the grand, high-temperature glaze firing, an event that could last for days and required constant, vigilant attention. The kiln was stoked with dense, hot-burning oak wood, its flames carefully fed, and managed to drive the temperature up past 1,200 degrees Celsius, a heat so intense it could melt common metals. Inside this inferno, the milky glaze slurry began to melt, transforming into a clear, glassy liquid that pooled across the surface of the tiles. At this precise moment, the dull, grayish pigments trapped beneath this molten layer underwent their miraculous change. The cobalt particles dissolved into the glass, blossoming into that legendary deep blue. The copper oxides flashed into vibrant emerald green, and for a precious few decades, the Armenian bole would transform into its elusive, translucent red. The master's role was to control not just the heat, but the very atmosphere inside the kiln, by carefully opening or closing vents and controlling the flow of air. He could create either an oxygen-rich environment or a reduced, smoky one. This decision was the final artistic brushstroke. A reduction atmosphere, for instance, could intensify a cobalt blue to an even deeper, more profound shade. The entire process was a sensory exercise. The usta would peer through small spy holes to judge the color of the flames. A bright orange indicating one temperature, a searing white indicating another. He might even listen to the roar of the fire or feel the heat radiating from the kiln's walls to gauge its progress. There were no thermometers or digital readouts. His body and intuition were the only instruments. The risks were immense and ever-present. If the temperature rose too quickly, the quartz in the clay and glaze could expand at different rates, causing the entire tile to crack or shatter. If the heat peaked too high, the volatile pigments could boil, bubble, or simply vanish. A sudden draft of cold air could cause thermal shock, spiderwebbing the glaze with countless tiny cracks. And if the kiln cooled down too rapidly, the glaze could craze or even peel off entirely. A single misjudgment could mean the loss of an entire batch, a financial disaster that could ruin a workshop. This immense pressure forged the kiln masters into figures of near mythical status. Their successful firings not just a technical achievement, but a triumph of human wisdom over the raw, uncontrollable power of the elements. When the kiln was finally opened after days of cooling, it was like unveiling a treasure chest. The artists would finally see if their faith and skill had been rewarded, revealing whether the dull gray pastes they had painted with had been successfully transfigured into a permanent, luminous garden of jewel-like color. Walking into an Ottoman space adorned with these tiles was never simply about admiring a beautiful decoration. It was like stepping into a blooming, silent conversation with the divine. Every flower, every curling vine, and every perfectly rendered leaf was a word in a rich visual language, a symbolic code that anyone versed in the culture could read. This wasn't arbitrary. The Ottoman artistic vision was deeply intertwined with the literary and philosophical worlds of Persian poetry and Sufi mysticism, where the natural world was seen as a mirror reflecting deeper spiritual truths. A garden was never just a garden. It was a metaphor for paradise, for the soul's journey, or for the divine presence itself. The tile artists were essentially translators, taking these complex poetic ideas and rendering them into a permanent, universal form that could be understood by both the literate elite and the common person who simply felt its beauty. Consider the tulip, perhaps the most iconic of all Ottoman floral motifs. Its elegant, pointed petals often cradled a flame-like shape at their center, and this was far from accidental. In a breathtakingly clever play of language, the artists were making a visual pun. The Arabic word for tulip is lail, and the letters that spell it lam, aleph, lam, here are the exact same letters that spell Allah, the name of God. So, a field of tulips blooming across a mosque's wall was quite literally a field of God's name, an endless repetition of the divine presence. Furthermore, in Sufi philosophy, the tulip's scarlet hue was said to spring from the blood of a martyr who died for love of God, and its seemingly black center represented a heart burnt to ashes by the fiery passion of divine love. This single, beautiful flower carried the weight of theology, linguistics, and deep mystical yearning. Then there is the carnation, with its serrated, delicate petals often painted in a joyful pink or red. Where the tulip spoke of divine majesty, The carnation whispered of human affection and earthly delight. In the poetic tradition, it was a symbol of love and affection, often exchanged between lovers. Its presence in a palace's tiled chamber, like those in the Topkapi harem, suggested intimacy, beauty, and the sweetness of life. Yet even this had a deeper layer. The flower's resilience and its clove-like scent also associated it with health and protection, a benign and cheerful presence warding off negativity. A more melancholic note was introduced by the hyacinth, with its heavy, drooping blooms. This flower was the undisputed symbol of sorrow, humility, and introspection in the Ottoman floral lexicon. Its downward gaze evoked a head bowed in prayer or grief, making it a poignant reminder of human transience and the importance of piety. You would often find hyacinths incorporated into the tile schemes of mausoleums and tombs, their graceful, sad forms offering a silent elegy for the departed and encouraging visitors to contemplate their own mortality. This language extended to other blooms as well. The rose, another central motif, was widely recognized as a symbol of the Prophet Muhammad, its perfect fragrance and layered beauty representing divine revelation and the unfolding of spiritual mystery. The humble iris stood for hope and messages, while the peony symbolized wealth and prosperity. This entire system of meaning transforms these tiled walls from mere ornamentation into a profound narrative medium. A panel combining tulips and carnations could be read as a dialogue between divine love and earthly love. A composition where hyacinths frame a blossoming rose might speak of the sorrow of human existence being redeemed by prophetic guidance. The artists were not just decorators. They were theologians and poets working in clay and pigment, weaving together a visual hymn that engaged the mind as much as it delighted the eye. They created an environment where every glance could reveal a new layer of meaning, encouraging a state of continuous contemplation and wonder, turning architecture into a living, breathing piece of sacred poetry. Just as the secrets of the kiln were mastered, a new cultural wind began to blow through the Ottoman Empire, one that would reshape the very soul of Iznik's art for a single, brilliant moment. Following a long period of military stagnation and economic difficulty, the early 18th century ushered in an era of unprecedented cultural flowering known as the Lail Devri, or the Tulip Era. This was not a time named for a sultan or a great battle, but for a flower, signaling a profound shift in the empire's priorities. Under the rule of Sultan Ahmed III and his visionary Grand Vizier, Nevşehirli Damat Ibrahim Pasha, the imperial focus turned dramatically from conquest to cultivation, from the battlefield to the pleasure garden. The capital, Istanbul, became the stage for an explosion of artistic patronage, public festivals, and a new, almost playful obsession with luxury and beauty. The austere grandeur of the classical Ottoman style gave way to a more delicate, joyful, and distinctly romantic sensibility. And this new spirit found its perfect expression in the tiles that adorned the lavish new palaces and pavilions built along the Golden Horn. The tulip, which had always held deep spiritual meaning, was now liberated to become a full-blown cultural obsession. It became the absolute superstar of the decorative arts, showing up everywhere from embroidered textiles and illuminated manuscripts to, most magnificently, the ceramic tiles that covered the walls of Sadabad and other pleasure palaces. But these were not the same tulips from the age of Suleiman. The Lail Devri tulip is instantly recognizable for its new artistic personality. The forms became more exaggerated, more stylized, and infinitely more graceful. Artists elongated the stems into impossibly slender, curling tendrils that seemed to dance across the white ceramic background, They refined the petals into elegant, sharp, pointed shapes that often curled playfully at the tips. The compositions themselves became less dense and formal. Instead of tightly interlocking patterns, designers often placed single, triumphant tulips in vases or let them soar freely across the tile, giving the designs a new sense of airiness and movement. This shift in style was deeply symbolic. The tulip's newfound prominence and its more delicate rendering reflected a society that was consciously turning inward, choosing to cultivate its own garden after years of external conflict. The elaborate tulip festivals held at night, where turtles with candles on their backs were released into the gardens to illuminate the flowers, were spectacles of imperial whimsy and power, designed to show off the Sultan's command not just over armies, but over nature itself. The tile workshops of Iznik, which had been in a slow decline, experienced a final, glorious renaissance to meet this new demand. They produced tiles with a lighter, almost pastel version of the classic color palette soft greens, a delicate manganese purple, and a particularly beautiful pale, watery blue that perfectly complemented the era's aesthetic. These tiles were less about inspiring religious awe and more about creating an atmosphere of refined leisure and poetic melancholy. Yet, for all its beauty, the tulip era was built on a fragile foundation. This extravagant focus on art and luxury, funded by heavy taxation, increasingly alienated the conservative religious establishment and the general populace who did not share in the court's pleasures. The Cultural Revolution was ultimately too narrow, too confined to the elite circles of the capital. The resentment simmered until it finally exploded in 1730 in a violent uprising known as the Patronage Rebellion, named after the janissary who led it. The revolt brought a brutal and sudden end to the era. The Sadabad palace was largely destroyed, and Sultan Ahmed III was overthrown. The rebellion crushed the political spirit of the tulip era, but it could not erase its profound artistic legacy. The delicate, lyrical style of Lail Devri tilework left a permanent mark on Ottoman aesthetics. It introduced a new vocabulary of fluidity and grace that would influence designers long after the palaces lay in ruins. More importantly, it cemented the tulip's status as the ultimate cultural icon of the Turks, a symbol of a time when beauty was considered a valid pursuit for an empire, and for a fleeting moment, the most powerful man in the world was preoccupied not with war, but with a flower. This fascination with the art of the East was no passing trend. It was a deliberate act of cultural diplomacy and a powerful symbol of the empire's global reach. The most profound external influence on Ottoman tile art didn't come from the West, but from the Far East, arriving on the decks of trading galleys and the backs of camels along the Silk Road. Beginning in the 15th century, the Ottoman court developed an insatiable appetite for Ming Dynasty porcelain from China, particularly the exquisite blue and white wares that were themselves a technological marvel. These pieces, with their luminous white bodies and brilliant cobalt blue designs, were revered as luxury items of the highest order, coveted by sultans and viziers who displayed them in palace treasuries alongside jewels and gold. To own this porcelain was a statement of extreme wealth and sophisticated taste, but for the Ottoman artisans, it was more than that. It became a breathtaking challenge and a profound source of inspiration. The initial response was one of pure, frustrated admiration. Ottoman potters, masters in their own right, were confounded by the physical properties of true porcelain. Their own Iznik ware was a quartz-based ceramic known as fritware, brilliant in its own way but different from the impossibly thin, resonant, and translucent Chinese porcelain made from kaolin clay.
Try as they might, they could not replicate its recipe, as the specific kaolin deposits required were not available within the empire. Instead of seeing this as a defeat, the Iznik artists chose a path of brilliant creative adaptation. They decided to capture the spirit of the Chinese aesthetic rather than its exact chemistry. They looked at those beloved Ming vases and plates and asked a different question, not how is this made, but what makes this beautiful? The answer lay in the cobalt blue designs dancing across that pure white background, a visual language they could translate onto their own unique ceramic canvas. This is where one of the most fascinating cultural syntheses in art history began to unfold. The Ottoman artists started to directly borrow iconic Chinese motifs, but they never simply copied them. Each element was filtered through their own sophisticated design sensibility and rich symbolic language, transforming it into something entirely new and distinctly Ottoman. They adopted the sinuous, comma-shaped cloud bands that drifted across Ming porcelain, but they often tightened their curls and integrated them more formally into their symmetrical patterns. The Chinese dragon, a benevolent celestial creature, sometimes appeared on early Iznik work, but its fierce appearance was often softened, its form becoming more decorative and less mythological, eventually evolving into a purely abstract, swirling tendril. The most significant and enduring adoption was the Chinese floral scroll. The Ming artists painted naturalistic, wandering vines of lotus, peony, and chrysanthemum. The Ottoman nakash, or designers, took this concept and perfected it, imposing their own love of order and complex geometry upon it. Their scrolls became more rhythmic, more perfectly balanced, and infinitely more intricate. They replaced the Chinese flowers with their own sacred botanical lexicon tulips, carnations, hyacinths, and roses, each bloom loaded with meaning. What had been a naturalistic garden in the Chinese style was transformed into a perfectly organized vision of paradise, a divine garden where every flower and leaf knew its place in a harmonious, eternal design. This artistic dialogue was made possible by the immense political and economic power of the 16th century Ottoman Empire. It was a superpower engaged in direct trade with the Ming dynasty, exchanging silver for porcelain along routes it protected and controlled. The presence of original Chinese blue and white ware in the Topkapi Palace treasury was not just a matter of taste. It was a flex of imperial might, a demonstration that Istanbul was a nexus of global trade. The Iznik tiles that eventually adorned the walls of the Süleymaniye Mosque, or the Rustam Pasha Mosque, are the culmination of this story. They represent a breathtaking fusion of East and West, where Chinese inspiration is completely absorbed and reborn as a powerful expression of Ottoman imperial identity. They are not imitations. They are a confident answer from one great empire to another, written in the universal language of cobalt and fire. To truly appreciate these tiles, we must step back and see them not as isolated artworks, but as the very skin of the buildings they adorned. The master artisans of Iznik weren't just creating beautiful objects. They were architectural partners, their kilns producing a massive, modular skin that could clothe a dome, define a prayer niche, or line the walls of a sultan's private chamber. This was a radical approach to architecture, transforming static stone and brick into a luminous, shimmering surface that seemed to breathe with life and color. The most breathtaking examples of this synergy are the great imperial mosques of Istanbul, like the magnificent Süleymaniye, designed by the legendary architect Mimar Sinan. For Sinan, light was a building material as important as stone, and he used Iznik tiles not as mere decoration, but as a way to sculpt and manipulate that light within his vast, soaring spaces. Imagine walking into the Süleymaniye Mosque for the first time in the 16th century. Your eyes are drawn upward to the immense dome, a symbol of the heavens. But instead of a dark, shadowy vault, the dome is illuminated by countless windows, and the supporting pillars and walls below are sheathed in thousands of brilliant Iznik tiles. The light filtering through the windows doesn't just hit stone, it hits a surface of glossy, reflective ceramic. The tiles act like a prism, catching the light and reflecting it back into the interior space, making the entire mosque glow with an ethereal, heavenly radiance. The deep cobalt blues would evoke the infinite sky, the emerald greens a lush paradise, and the pristine white background would amplify the light itself. Sinan used the tiles as a functional component of his design, ensuring that even on an overcast day, the interior of his mosque would be bathed in a soft, divine luminosity that lifted the spirit of every worshiper. This architectural integration required incredible planning and precision from the tile workshops. These were not mass-produced, one-size-fits-all items. A single architectural commission could involve tens of thousands of individual tiles, each one part of a giant, preordained puzzle. The master designer, or nakash, would first create a full-scale cartoon of the entire wall or panel to be covered. This drawing was then carefully sectioned off into a grid corresponding to the size of each individual tile. Every tile was therefore destined for a specific location from the moment it was formed. The painters had to work with this master plan in mind, ensuring that the curling vine that started on one tile would perfectly meet its continuation on the tile beside it, that the rosette in the corner of one panel would be mirrored exactly in the opposite corner. It was a staggering feat of logistics and artistic coordination, ensuring that when the tiles were finally installed, they would merge seamlessly into a single monumental image, with no visible breaks or misalignments to disrupt the illusion of a vast, continuous ceramic painting. The location and subject matter of these tile panels were never arbitrary. They were carefully chosen to reinforce the function and symbolism of the space. In a mosque, the most sacred area is the mihrab, the niche that indicates the direction of Mecca. This focal point was always the most lavishly decorated, often with tiles featuring intricate calligraphy of verses from the Quran, surrounded by blossoming floral designs that symbolize the garden of paradise awaiting the faithful. In a palace like Topkapi, the language shifted from purely spiritual to imperial and personal. The private chambers of the Sultan, such as the famed circumcision room, are adorned with tiles depicting vibrant, joyful scenes of flowers, fruit, and even ships, celebrating life, fertility, and the empire's mastery of the seas. The harem walls feature more intimate, delicate designs of spring flowers and cypress trees, creating a serene, private oasis away from the rigid formality of the court. In this way, the tiles became structural storytellers. A wall in the Süleymaniye tells a story of faith and devotion through its sacred verses and spiritual symbols. A chamber in Topkapi tells a story of worldly power, luxury, and the private joys of the ruler. A tomb tells a story of grief, memory, and hope for eternal paradise through its more subdued patterns and melancholic hyacinths. The architecture provided the stage, and the Iznik tiles provided the narrative, a permanent, silent script baked into the very walls, telling all who entered about the power, piety, and unparalleled beauty of the empire that created them. They turned buildings into books, and every visitor into a reader of a story written in fire and earth. Behind every sublime tiled wall, guiding the hands of the clay preparers, the pigment grinders, and the kiln masters, was the intellectual and artistic architect of the entire endeavor, the master designer or nakash. While the ustas of the workshop were revered for their technical mastery, the nakash was the visionary, the individual who first conceived the entire complex symphony of pattern and meaning that would eventually cover an entire building. These artists were the elite of the elite, trained not in the dusty workshops of Iznik, but within the hallowed walls of the imperial palace in Istanbul itself, in a special academy known as the Nakashain. This was less a school and more a powerhouse of artistic innovation, a think tank where the official visual identity of the entire Ottoman Empire was forged. Admission to the Nakashain was fiercely competitive, with the most talented young artists identified from across the empire and brought to the palace to undergo a rigorous, decades-long apprenticeship. Their training was incredibly comprehensive. They didn't just learn to draw, they studied geometry, calligraphy, botany, and classical Persian poetry. They had to understand the mathematical principles of complex star patterns, the precise brushstrokes of Arabic script, the exact structure of a tulip's petal, and the symbolic meaning behind every hyacinth and carnation. This fusion of science, art, and literature was essential, for a nakash was not merely a decorator. He was a scholar-artist, tasked with translating the intellectual and spiritual ambitions of the Sultan and his court into a universal visual language that could be understood by all. The primary tools of the nakash were not brushes and pigments, but compasses, rulers, and his meticulously maintained personal pattern books, or albums. These albums were priceless treasures, filled with hundreds of detailed drawings, each a potential design for a future carpet, textile, or tile panel. They contained everything from entire elaborate compositions for a mihrab to smaller, modular units of pattern, a single rosette, a curling vine, a perfectly executed leaf that could be combined and recombined in endless variations, much like a musical composer working with motifs and phrases. These books were his library, his database, and his greatest professional secret, accumulated over a lifetime of study and observation. When a major commission came in, for instance, to design the tile scheme for an entire mosque, the nakash would begin by creating a full-scale cartoon of the wall. This was a monumental drawing on paper, often pieced together from many sheets, that represented the exact final size of the tiled surface. Every line, every curve, every delicate flower had to be perfectly rendered at a 1-to-1 scale. This master cartoon was then transferred onto a grid, with each square representing the dimensions of a single tile. This grid system was the crucial logistical link between the artist's grand vision and the practical reality of ceramic production. It allowed the design to be systematically broken down into thousands of individual, manageable units, each with its own specific place in the greater puzzle. Only then would this carefully gridded cartoon make its way from the palace in Istanbul to the workshops of Iznik. There, skilled copyists would use a technique called pouncing to transfer the design on the bisque-fired white tiles. They would lay the paper over the tile and prick tiny holes along all the lines of the design with a needle. Then they would dust a fine charcoal powder through these perforations, leaving a faint dotted outline on the clay surface below, a connect-the-dots guide for the painters to follow. This ensured that every single tile, painted by different hands over many weeks, would fit perfectly with its neighbors, the curling vine from one tile meeting its continuation on the next without a single millimeter of error. The nakash, though far removed from the kilns and the clay, was therefore present in every brushstroke. his initial vision governing the entire process from the quiet of the palace library to the fiery chaos of the workshop. This magnificent artistic machine, from the clay pits of Iznik to the imperial workshops of Istanbul, was fueled by one thing above all else: the immense wealth and ambition of its patrons. The creation of these monumental tile projects was phenomenally expensive, a luxury on a scale that only the most powerful figures in the empire could possibly afford. But for sultans, grand viziers, and even powerful women of the harem, commissioning these works was never merely an act of decoration. It was a calculated investment in power, piety, and permanence, a way to literally cement their legacy into the very walls of the empire's most important buildings. At the zenith of this patronage system stood Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, whose very name evokes an era of unparalleled Ottoman power and cultural achievement. His reign was a golden age, and he understood that true power was projected not only through military might, but through magnificent art and architecture. Suleiman's chief architect, the genius Mimar Sinan, was the instrument of this vision, but the Sultan was its driving force. When Suleiman commissioned the Suleimani Mosque complex, it was designed to be the ultimate statement of his reign, a sprawling center of faith, education, and imperial authority that would dominate the Istanbul skyline. The tens of thousands of Iznik tiles that adorned its interior were a critical part of this message. Their flawless craftsmanship and breathtaking beauty were direct reflections of the Sultan's own perfection as a ruler. The shimmering surfaces, glowing with divine light, proclaimed that his reign was blessed, orderly, and eternally prosperous. Every tile was a silent herald of his magnificence, telling his subjects and the world that his was a reign touched by heaven itself. Yet the Sultan was not the only player in this high-stakes game of artistic legacy. Just beside the Suleimani stands another masterpiece, the Rustam Pasha Mosque, a stunning declaration of power from a very different figure. Rustam Pasha was Suleiman's Grand Vizier and, most famously, his son-in-law through his marriage to the Sultan's powerful wife, Hürrem Sultan. He was also notoriously one of the wealthiest men in Ottoman history, a master of finance who some whispered had amassed his fortune through less than scrupulous means. For a man of his background, building a grand mosque was the ultimate act of legitimization. Its exterior is modest, tucked away above a bustling market, but to step inside is to be utterly overwhelmed by a tidal wave of Iznik brilliance. Every single surface, from the floor to the galleries, is covered in the most exquisite tiles ever produced, featuring the entire glorious palette, including the elusive red. This was not a statement of modest piety. This was an explosive, almost aggressive display of wealth and taste. Rustam Pasha was using art to scrub his reputation clean, to proclaim that regardless of how he made his money, he possessed the refinement and devotion to spend it on creating a paradise on earth. He was buying his way into the annals of greatness, and he paid for it in cobalt and quartz. Perhaps the most fascinating and transformative patron of all was a woman who never even set foot in a tile workshop, Hürrem Sultan. Known in the West as Roxolana, she was Suleiman's legal wife and most trusted confidante, a figure who radically redefined the political influence possible for a woman in the Ottoman court. Her patronage was deeply personal and strategic. Following a terrible fire that destroyed the old imperial harem, Hürrem commissioned a new bath complex, the Hayski Hürrem Sultan Hammami, right on the city's main thoroughfare. This was a hugely public act of philanthropy and piety, unprecedented for a woman of the harem. While the hammam itself is not tiled to the same overwhelming degree as a mosque, her influence is felt elsewhere. She is widely believed to have been the driving force behind the lavish tilework in the harem section of Topkapi Palace, transforming the private living quarters of the Sultan's family into a luxurious, serene oasis adorned with floral and naturalistic designs. More importantly, as the mother of the future Sultan Selim II, her patronage set a powerful precedent. She demonstrated that the Sultan's women could be powerful builders and patrons in their own right, using architecture and its decoration to craft a public image of benevolence, piety, and immense influence, paving the way for the great female patrons of the following centuries. Through their commissions, these figures did not just order decoration. They directed the very aesthetic of an empire, turning the silent, beautiful language of tiles into a powerful dialogue about power, memory, and who gets to write their name, however indirectly, into the history books. Despite this breathtaking fusion of art and empire, the golden age of Iznik could not last forever. The very system that enabled its rise, lavish imperial patronage, proved to be its greatest vulnerability. By the early 17th century, the Ottoman Empire was beginning to strain under the weight of its own vastness. A series of costly and protracted wars, coupled with economic inflation and a gradual shift in global trade routes that bypassed traditional Ottoman-controlled paths, began to empty the imperial coffers. The sultans who followed Suleiman the Magnificent were often less interested in funding grand architectural projects and more focused on simply maintaining the empire's borders. The steady stream of massive commissions for mosques and palaces, which had kept hundreds of Iznik workshops humming for generations, slowed to a trickle and then, for all practical purposes, stopped entirely. This sudden loss of their primary customer was a catastrophic blow to the Iznik economy. The workshops were left with immense overhead skilled artisans to pay, expensive raw materials to import, and massive kilns to maintain, but without the large, guaranteed orders that made it all financially viable. In a desperate attempt to survive, many workshops were forced to pivot to a very different market, producing cheaper, smaller consumer goods like bowls, dishes, and cups for a less affluent public. This shift in audience fundamentally changed the artistic equation. Where a sultan would pay a premium for perfection, a local merchant wanted affordability. The workshops, struggling to stay afloat, began to take shortcuts that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. The first and most telling casualty was the legendary purity of the quartz-rich clay. To cut costs, workshops began to mix their precious white Iznik clay with cheaper, coarser local clays. The result was immediate and visible. The ceramic body, once a luminous, bright white that amplified every color, became a dull, grayish, or off-white tone. This inferior base mudded the brilliant glazes applied over it, making the famous blues appear less vibrant and the whites less brilliant. The clay itself also became more difficult to work with. Impurities caused tiles to warp or crack during firing at a much higher rate, leading to more wasted work and lost revenue. The next sacrifice was in the precious pigments themselves. The master grinder, once the guardian of an alchemical secret, was replaced by rushed, cost-conscious grinding that failed to reduce the cobalt and other minerals to their requisite velvety fineness. Coarser pigment particles refused to melt seamlessly into the glaze during firing, resulting in a gritty, uneven surface where the color could appear blotchy or even scratchy to the touch. Most tragically, the workshops could simply no longer afford the most expensive colors at all. The glorious ultramarine blue from Afghan lapis lazuli vanished completely. The capricious, temperamental Armenian bole red, already difficult to master, was deemed too risky and costly to produce and was abandoned. the palette shrank to a sad handful of colors: a duller cobalt blue, a sometimes muddy copper green, and a blackish manganese purple. The rich, jewel-like harmony of the Golden Age was replaced by a monotonous and subdued chorus. But the most devastating loss was not of materials, but of people. The intricate knowledge required to create these masterpieces was not written down in manuals. It lived in the hands and instincts of the master artisans, the ustas. As workshops closed, these masters were forced to find other work, often leaving Iznik altogether. Their apprentices, with no one left to teach them the deepest secrets of the craft, found themselves adrift. The fragile, oral tradition of knowledge, the exact feel of the perfect clay slurry, the precise sound of the kiln at the critical moment, the secret formula for a glaze that would not craze died with the last generation that possessed it. A single economic downturn didn't just close factories. It severed a living chain of wisdom that had been passed down for over 2 centuries. The light of Iznik didn't flicker out. It was extinguished by a perfect storm of financial pressure, lost patronage, and the silent, irreplaceable departure of the masters who held its final secrets. For centuries, the physical heart of Iznik's ceramic miracle, the workshops, the kilns, the very ground where the masters walked, was lost to history, buried under modern buildings and farmland. The knowledge of how these tiles were made had vanished into the air like smoke from a cooled kiln, leaving behind only the beautiful, silent results adorning distant mosques. Then, in the 1960s, a team of archaeologists led by Professor Oktay Aslanapa began the painstaking work of digging for the truth, quite literally with trowels and brushes. Their excavations in the town of Iznik were a revelation, uncovering the scattered remains of the very kilns that had fueled the empire's golden age. These weren't just piles of old bricks. They were time capsules, holding the shattered secrets of a forgotten industry. The discovery of these bottle-shaped kilns, with their distinctive fireboxes and flues, was the first major breakthrough. By carefully mapping their structure, archaeologists could finally understand the scale and mechanics of the operation. They realized these were not small, artisanal ovens for a few precious pots. These were industrial-scale furnaces, capable of firing thousands of tiles in a single, colossal batch. The sheer number of kiln sites confirmed historical accounts of Iznik as a true factory town. Its skyline once dominated by the chimneys of a thriving ceramic industry. But the kilns themselves were only part of the story. The true treasure lay in the ground surrounding them, vast middens or refuse heaps, filled with the workshop's heartbreaking failures. For historians, these piles of broken, discarded fragments were more valuable than any perfect museum piece. A flawless tile reveals only its final, glorious success, but a shattered waster tells you everything that went wrong. These broken pieces became a brutally honest diary of the entire production process. Archaeologists found tiles that had cracked from thermal shock, their glaze crazed with a spiderweb of lines from cooling too quickly. They found pieces where the brilliant colors had bled into each other, a sign that the glaze formula was slightly off or the firing temperature too high. Most tellingly, they found countless tiles where the famed red had vaporized completely, leaving behind a ghostly, transparent glaze where a flower should have been a silent testament to the immense difficulty of mastering that color. By analyzing these fragments layer by layer, scientists could perform a kind of ceramic autopsy, using modern tools like scanning electron microscopes and X-ray fluorescence. They could analyze the exact chemical composition of the glazes and the clay body of these discarded pieces. This scientific analysis provided irrefutable proof of what the historical sources only hinted at. They could see the precise moment in the historical record when the potters began to adulterate their famous white clay with cheaper, darker materials, a desperate cost-cutting measure that led to the duller, grayish backgrounds of the later, declining period. They could identify the exact minerals used for each color, confirming the use of Armenian bole for the red, and proving that the later tiles lacked the key elements that made the classic palette so vibrant. This forensic evidence became the ultimate tool for art historians and curators, providing a clear checklist to distinguish a genuine, Golden Age Iznik tile from a later imitation or outright fake. Before these excavations, authentication relied heavily on the trained but subjective eye of a connoisseur. Now they had a scientific baseline. A tile claiming to be from the 16th century could be tested. Does its clay body have the high, pure quartz content of the early period? Does the red glaze contain the specific chemical signature of Armenian bole? Does the blue have the velvety consistency of properly ground cobalt? Or is it gritty and impure? The broken evidence of failure, pulled from the mud of Iznik, finally gave experts the definitive language to certify true success, allowing them to separate the timeless masterpieces from the clever copies and safeguard one of the world's most dazzling artistic achievements for generations to come. Stepping into a monument like the Blue Mosque today is to witness a miracle of endurance, but that enduring beauty is not simply a matter of passive survival. It is the result of a continuous, painstaking battle against time, fought by a dedicated army of modern conservators and restorers. Their work is a fascinating blend of art, science, and archaeology, a delicate process of bringing the past back to life without erasing the authentic marks of its long history. The first and most daunting challenge they face is the simple fact that the original art is, in many ways, irreplaceable. A missing section of tilework isn't a blank space. It's a unique, hand-painted piece of a 500-year-old puzzle for which there is no spare. The conservator's first task is to become a forensic art historian, studying the surviving original tiles to understand not just the pattern, but the very hand of the artist, the pressure of their brush, the consistency of their pigment, the rhythm of their design. Matching the color is perhaps the most famous and difficult hurdle. As we've seen, the original Iznik palette, with its legendary blue and elusive red, was achieved through alchemical processes and specific minerals that are no longer available or fully understood. A modern restorer cannot simply open a tube of Iznik blue paint. They must become a chemist, reverse engineering the color through rigorous analysis. They begin by taking tiny, microscopic samples from damaged or already lost areas of original tile, often from the edges where it won't be visible. Using advanced techniques like spectrometry, they can break down the color into its exact chemical components, identifying the specific cobalt ore or copper oxide used. But knowing the recipe is only half the battle. They must then grind their own pigments to the impossibly fine consistency of the originals, a process that requires immense patience and a feel for the material that borders on the instinctual. Even with a perfect color match in the lab, the final result can only be confirmed in the kiln, as the same magical transformation from dull paste to brilliant jewel must occur all over again, a moment of truth that still holds its share of anxiety for the modern master. Beyond color, the pattern itself presents a monumental logical challenge. A vast wall might contain tens of thousands of tiles, each one part of a continuous, flowing design. If a dozen tiles are missing from a floral scroll, the restorers must figure out exactly what was there. This often involves a form of artistic detective work, using high-resolution photography and digital software to map the entire wall and extrapolate the missing patterns based on the symmetry and repetition found in the surviving sections. In some cases, they might get incredibly lucky and find an archived copy of the original master cartoon from the imperial Nakashain, but this is rare. More often, they rely on old photographs, architectural drawings, and even illustrations from centuries-old travel books to get a sense of the original design before damage occurred. Each new tile, therefore, is not a copy but a reasoned recreation, an informed guess based on deep scholarship and a profound respect for the original artist's intent. This meticulous work sparks a deep and ongoing ethical debate within the conservation community, a tension between restoration and preservation. The preservationist argues that the authentic historical object, with its cracks, its losses, its patina of age, should be stabilized and protected, but not disguised or replaced. A missing tile should remain missing, they say, an honest testament to the passage of time and the history the object has witnessed. To fill it in with a new, bright replica is to create a falsehood, a hybrid object that is neither fully old nor authentically new, potentially misleading future generations. The restorer, on the other hand, argues that these buildings and their decoration were conceived as complete, immersive artistic experiences. A gaping hole in a dome's pattern is a distraction that breaks the spiritual and aesthetic spell the original artists worked so hard to create. Their goal is to make the damage invisible, to return the viewer to the intended experience of awe and wonder, allowing the artwork to function as it was meant to. In practice, the best conservation projects find a thoughtful middle ground. The new replacement tiles are often marked with a tiny, almost invisible code or date on the back, ensuring that future scholars will be able to distinguish the 21st century work from the 16th. The choice of materials is also crucial. Conservators strive to use reversible techniques and materials, so that if a better method is invented in 50 years, their work can be safely removed without harming the original historic fabric that remains. This behind-the-scenes effort is a profound act of respect. It requires the restorer to sublimate their own ego, to become a conduit for the original masters of Iznik. Their greatest success is not when their new tile is noticed, but when it disappears completely into the hole, silently supporting the ancient masterpiece and allowing it to shine for another 500 years. So how can you, standing in a museum or considering an acquisition, tell the difference between a priceless piece of history and a clever modern imitation? The first and most immediate giveaway is the color, but not in the way you might think. It's not necessarily about vibrancy. Many modern reproductions are very brightly colored. It's about the specific depth and luminosity of the hue. Look closely at a genuine 16th century Iznik blue. It doesn't look like it's painted on the surface. It looks like it glows from within the tile itself. This is the magic of that high quartz clay body and the way the pigment dissolved in the glaze. A modern fake often has a blue that sits on top, looking more like a coat of paint. It can be superficially bright, but it lacks that inner light, that crystalline depth that makes the original feel like you're looking into a deep pool of water rather than at a painted surface. Next, get eye level with the tile and examine the surface of the glaze. On a true antique, the glaze is not perfectly flat or glassy smooth. Because it was hand applied by dipping and then fired in a wood-burning kiln, the surface often has a very subtle, organic texture. You might see tiny, almost imperceptible pits known as pinholes, minute swirling patterns from the liquid glaze settling. or a gentle, wavy undulation that catches the light differently as you move past it. This is the result of a natural human process. A modern reproduction, often fired in a perfectly controlled electric kiln and sprayed with glaze, will frequently have a flawlessly even, almost plastic-like surface that feels too perfect, too sterile, and lacks the gentle, living character of the original. Perhaps the most conclusive test requires the lightest touch. Run your finger very gently across the painted design on a genuine tile. If you can feel the raised edge of the pattern, if you can sense the topography of the brushstrokes beneath the glaze, you are almost certainly touching a modern fake. Authentic Iznik work is characterized by its seamless integration of paint and glaze. The pigments melted into the glassy matrix during the high-temperature firing, creating a perfectly smooth, monolithic surface. There is no physical difference between the blue of a flower and the white of the background. Your finger will glide across it without a single bump or ridge. This flawless fusion is incredibly difficult to achieve today and is a hallmark of the master's fire. Finally, train your eye on the pattern itself, particularly the outlines. The master painters worked with incredible confidence and speed, their brushstrokes assured and flowing. Look at the lines defining a petal or a leaf. On a real tile, these lines are typically razor sharp, consistent in thickness, and drawn with a single, unbroken, and supremely confident stroke. There's no hesitation. A forger, working slowly and carefully to copy a complex design, often betrays themselves with a slightly shaky or wobbly line. They might go back over a stroke to correct it, creating a slightly thicker, clumsier line. They might struggle with the intricate symmetry, resulting in a pattern that feels just a little bit off balance or compressed. The human hand of a master, guided by years of muscle memory, is simply different from the hand of a copier, no matter how skilled. The original design feels alive and effortless, while the copy often feels labored, a beautiful but ultimately lifeless echo of the real thing. This artistic influence knew no borders, becoming a coveted symbol of sophistication from the palaces of Italy to the gardens of India. As Ottoman trading galleys and diplomatic missions carried these luminous ceramics across the Mediterranean, they arrived in a Europe already fascinated by the exotic East. In Italy, particularly in the bustling port cities of Venice and Florence, local artisans encountered Iznik tiles and were utterly captivated by their vibrant cobalt blues and intricate floral designs. These Italian craftsmen, masters of their own tin-glazed earthenware known as maiolica, immediately recognized a superior aesthetic. They began to imitate the Ottoman patterns, but with their own distinctive flair, creating a fascinating hybrid art form. This wasn't mere copying, it was creative adaptation. They took the Turkish carnations and tulips and reinterpreted them through a Renaissance lens, often incorporating them into designs featuring classical figures or European heraldry. This new style became known as alla porcellana or compendirio, a direct nod to the Eastern inspiration they so admired. A wealthy Venetian merchant might not have been able to afford genuine Chinese porcelain or even Iznik ware, but he could commission a local workshop to create a maiolica service decorated with Ottoman-inspired florals, instantly signaling his worldly taste and access to global luxury trends. The influence traveled even farther east, profoundly impacting the two other great Islamic empires of the early modern period, Safavid Persia and Mughal India. Here, the relationship was more of a dynamic dialogue between artistic superpowers. The Safavids, renowned for their own exquisite ceramic tradition, saw in Ottoman tiles a different approach to architectural decoration. one that favored larger, more modular panels to create overwhelming visual impact. This can be seen in the subtle refinements of later Persian monuments, where the scale of tiled surfaces expanded. For the Mughals, the connection was even more personal. The empire's founder, Babur, traced his lineage back to the great Turkish conqueror Timur, and the Mughal court consistently looked to the Ottoman world as both a political rival and a cultural reference point. When Emperor Shah Jahan built the ultimate monument to love, the Taj Mahal, he chose to adorn it with vast expanses of floral tiles. While executed by local Indian artisans, the designs clearly echo the Ottoman language of tulips, cypresses, and scrolling vines, reimagined in a distinctly Mughal palette that included softer greens and yellows. The tile work in the Taj Mahal is a silent testament to this trans-imperial conversation, a breathtaking example of how a Turkish art form could be adapted to express the most profound emotions of an Indian emperor. This global reach transformed Ottoman tiles into more than just building materials. They became one of the world's earliest luxury brands, a universal shorthand for power, piety, and impeccable taste. Their journey from the kilns of Iznik to the far corners of the world tells a story not of conquest, but of connection. A Dutch still life painting from the 17th century might feature an Iznik dish overflowing with fruit, displayed proudly alongside a Venetian glass and a Chinese vase, a carefully composed collection meant to showcase the homeowner's international affluence and cultured discernment. In this way, these tiles transcended their function. They became portable pieces of prestige, their very presence in a home or a palace in London, Isfahan, or Agra broadcasting a clear message about the owner's access to the most exclusive and sophisticated networks of global trade and diplomacy. They were solid evidence that one was a citizen of a wider, more interconnected world. Today, a quiet but determined renaissance is underway, led by a new generation of artisans who have made it their life's work to resurrect these lost techniques from the ashes of history. These modern masters are not merely imitators. They are part historian, part chemist, and part artist, dedicating themselves to a painstaking process of reverse engineering that borders on archaeological detective work. In studios across Turkey, from small ateliers in Istanbul to workshops near the old kiln sites of Iznik, these individuals spend years, sometimes decades, experimenting with clay mixtures, grinding pigments by hand, and firing test tiles in custom-built kilns, all in pursuit of a beauty that the world had forgotten. Their mission is driven by a profound respect for the original masters and a burning desire to ensure that this cultural flame is not extinguished, but is instead passed forward, brighter than ever. The holy grail for every one of these revivalists remains the recapture of that elusive, translucent Armenian bole red. The quest is a fascinating blend of high technology and ancient craft. Artists like the renowned Mehmet Guisoy in Iznik begin not with a brush, but with a microscope, analyzing minute samples from surviving 16th century tiles to understand their precise chemical fingerprint. They source raw materials from the same ancient quarries, painstakingly grinding the Armenian bole by hand in stone mortars for weeks on end to achieve that crucial velvety fineness. The real challenge, however, lies in the kiln. Without a centuries-old oral tradition to guide them, these modern masters must rely on a process of relentless trial and error, meticulously logging the results of each firing, adjusting temperatures by mere degrees, altering the kiln's atmosphere, and observing the results with a watchful eye. Each shattered, failed tile is not a disappointment but a vital piece of data, bringing them one step closer to unlocking the secret. While a perfect historical replication remains elusive, the deepest reds they have achieved are breathtakingly close, a testament to their unwavering dedication and a symbol of hope that this lost knowledge may one day be fully regained. Their work extends far beyond the studio wall, playing a crucial role in the preservation of Turkey's most cherished historical monuments. When the time comes to restore a damaged section of the Blue Mosque or the Topkapi Palace, it is often these contemporary artisans who are commissioned to create the replacement tiles. This is an immense responsibility, requiring them to perfectly match not only the color and pattern of the originals, but also the very spirit in which they were made. They study the brush strokes of the anonymous 16th century painters, learning their rhythm and flow in order to ensure that a new tulip or carnation seamlessly joins its ancient companions on the wall. In this sacred work, the modern artisan becomes a bridge across centuries, their hand guided by the ghosts of the old masters, ensuring that the architectural symphony of light and color continues unbroken for generations to come. For collectors and art lovers around the world, the work of these revivalists offers a rare opportunity to own a piece of this living history. A contemporary Iznik tile, crafted with traditional methods and materials, is far more than a simple reproduction. It is a unique artwork that carries the soul of the past into the present. These pieces command significant respect and value, not for their age, but for their authenticity of technique and the profound story they tell of cultural perseverance. Each one is a collaboration across time, a dialogue between the original ustas and the artists who have dedicated their lives to honoring their legacy. In studios filled with the scent of wet clay and the quiet concentration of painters bent over their work, the glorious tradition of Ottoman tile art is not a relic to be admired behind glass, but a vibrant, evolving practice, its colors as alive and luminous today as they were 500 years ago. The secrets locked within these shattered fragments, however, could not be fully unlocked by trowels and brushes alone. For the true nature of the Iznik miracle, the intimate, atomic dance between clay and color, remained invisible to the naked eye. It was only with the advent of modern scientific instruments that researchers could finally peer into the very heart of the glaze, to see what the master ustas knew only through instinct and experience. Technologies like X-ray diffraction and scanning electron microscopy have become our time machines, allowing us to look over the shoulders of those 16th century artisans and finally understand the precise alchemy they commanded. X-ray diffraction, or XRD, works like a kind of mineralogical fingerprint scanner. Scientists take a tiny, almost dust-sized sample from a tile and bombard it with X-rays. As these rays hit the crystalline structures within the sample, they diffract or scatter in unique, predictable patterns. Each mineral has its own distinct diffraction signature. By analyzing this pattern, researchers can identify the exact crystalline compounds present with absolute certainty. This is how we moved from historical guesswork to scientific fact. XRD analysis definitively confirmed the use of quartz as the primary body of the tile and the key ingredient in the glaze. It identified the specific cobalt minerals used for the blue, the copper oxides for the green, and it provided the iron oxide signature that acts as the unmistakable fingerprint of Armenian bole, putting to rest any doubt about the source of that legendary red. This technology doesn't just tell us what is there, it also reveals what is not. The absence of certain elements like tin helps distinguish true Iznik ware from other ceramic traditions, providing an irrefutable chemical passport for authentication. If XRD gives us the ingredient list, then the scanning electron microscope, or SEM, shows us the finished recipe in stunning nanoscale detail. This powerful instrument fires a focused beam of electrons at a sample, and by reading the signals that come back, it constructs an incredibly high-resolution image, allowing us to see the surface of a tile magnified thousands or even hundreds of thousands of times. This is where the true genius of the Iznik technique becomes visible. SEM imagery reveals the perfect, glassy matrix of the quartz-based glaze, a smooth sea frozen in time. Nestled within this glass, we can see the individual pigment particles. In a top-tier Golden Age tile, the cobalt particles for the blue are exquisitely small and evenly distributed, having melted completely into the glaze. This perfect integration is what creates that famous depth and luminosity, the sense of color glowing from within. In contrast, SEM images of later, declining period tiles or modern fakes tell a story of decline. We see larger, coarser pigment particles that fail to melt properly, sitting awkwardly in the glaze and creating a gritty, superficial appearance that lacks the inner light of the originals. Perhaps the most fascinating application of this technology is in solving the mystery of the firing temperatures. By examining the microstructure of the glaze and the clay body under the icium, scientists can see how vitrified, how glass-like and dense the materials became. The extent of this vitrification is a direct result of the peak temperature and duration of the firing. This analysis has revealed that the Iznik kiln masters were operating at the very edge of possibility, pushing their kilns to an astonishing 1,250 degrees Celsius. This is an incredibly narrow window of success. A few degrees lower, and the quartz wouldn't fully vitrify, leaving a porous, dull surface. A few degrees higher, and the entire piece could slump, warp, or see its volatile pigments like the red iron oxide boil away into nothingness. This scientific evidence confirms the immense skill of the kiln master. His ability to hold this incredible temperature steady for hours using only his senses, without a single modern measuring instrument. The electron microscope doesn't just show us what they made. It shows us how close they always were to catastrophe, elevating their achievement from mere craftsmanship to a form of artistic high-wire act. This journey from the kilns of Iznik to the silver screen and our living rooms is a testament to a design language so powerful it transcends centuries. You've likely encountered their influence without even realizing it, as the timeless beauty of these patterns has captivated set designers and art directors around the world. In big-budget historical epics and fantasy series, Ottoman tiles are a visual shorthand for opulence, mystery, and an exotic, ancient grandeur. A palace corridor lined with these luminous ceramics instantly signals to the audience that they are in a place of immense power and refined culture. The intricate, non-representational patterns also offer a fantastic solution for filmmakers needing to create a sense of historical authenticity without depicting specific religious iconography that might anchor a setting too firmly in one faith, allowing the designs to feel both ancient and otherworldly. This makes them a perfect choice for fictional universes, where they can suggest a deep, complex history and a visually stunning aesthetic that feels both familiar and fantastically new. Beyond the glow of the projector, the influence of these tiles has gracefully stepped into the world of high fashion and textile design. Renowned fashion houses have repeatedly drawn inspiration from the elegant botanical motifs and complex geometric layouts, translating the language of the tile into luxurious fabrics. Imagine a flowing evening gown embroidered with an intricate pattern of twisting tulips and carnations, its silhouette echoing the graceful curves of an Iznik scroll. or a bold, structured jacket that takes its color palette directly from the classic cobalt blue and emerald green, making a dramatic statement that is both modern and deeply historical. Textile designers faithfully replicate these patterns on silks, velvets, and even durable cottons, bringing a touch of Ottoman splendor into contemporary wardrobes and home furnishings. This isn't about costume. It's about a continuous thread of beauty, where a 16th century floral design can feel utterly fresh and relevant on a runway or a throw pillow today. Perhaps the most personal and widespread revival is happening in the world of interior design, where a single Iznik-style tile can serve as a stunning focal point in a modern home. Interior designers and homeowners are increasingly using these patterns not to recreate an Ottoman palace, but to add a layer of artistry and history to contemporary spaces. A classic subway tile backsplash in a kitchen might be interrupted by a few hand-painted Iznik-inspired tiles featuring a delicate spray of hyacinths, creating a unique and personal artistic statement. A minimalist bathroom can be transformed by a border of deep blue and white tiles running along a wall, their intricate pattern providing a captivating visual texture that feels both serene and engaging. Fireplaces framed with these tiles become works of art, and even a single large tile displayed on a stand is treated like the masterpiece it is. This trend speaks to a desire for authenticity and craftsmanship in our surroundings, a move away from mass-produced anonymity toward objects that tell a story and connect us to a long tradition of human artistry. This enduring appeal raises a fascinating question. Why does this centuries-old art form resonate so powerfully with our modern sensibility? The answer lies in the unique combination of qualities these designs possess. In an age of digital perfection and sleek minimalism, the slight organic imperfections of handcrafted tiles, the gentle wave in the glaze, the tiny pinholes from the firing process offer a warmth and humanity that feels incredibly valuable. Furthermore, the mathematical precision of their geometric underpinnings feels surprisingly contemporary, appealing to our love of structure and pattern, while the flowing natural motifs satisfy a deep yearning to connect with the natural world. They represent a perfect balance, both orderly and organic, meticulously planned and beautifully hand-executed. They are not just decorations, they are portable pieces of history, each one a fragment of a story that began in a fiery kiln 500 years ago, now finding new life and new meaning in the places we live and the things we love. Despite all we've learned from shattered kiln wasters and high-tech microscopes, the story of Iznik tile art remains punctuated by profound and tantalizing mysteries. The most enduring legend speaks of a single master recipe book, a comprehensive manual containing the exact formulas for the clay body, the glaze, and every legendary color, from the deepest cobalt to the most elusive red. This book, the compiled wisdom of generations of master ustas, was said to be so valuable it was guarded like a state secret within the imperial workshops. The question that haunts historians is simple. Did it ever truly exist? If it did, its fate is one of history's great silent tragedies. It may have been lost in one of the many fires that ravaged workshops, or perhaps it was secretly held by a single family line that died out without an heir, their knowledge dying with them. Alternatively, the very idea of a centralized book might be a myth we've created to simplify a more complex reality. The true recipe book may have never been written down at all, but instead existed as a living oral tradition, a collection of songs, rhymes, and hands-on techniques passed directly from master to apprentice in the smoky, intimate environment of the workshop, a fragile chain of wisdom that, once broken, could never be reforged. This leads directly to another, more scientific puzzle: the inconsistent behavior of the colors themselves. We understand the chemistry of why the cobalt blue is so permanent, its particles dissolved and perfectly suspended within the glassy glaze matrix, immune to sunlight and weathering. But why did some tiles retain their vibrancy for centuries while others, from the same period and even the same kiln load, show subtle fading or minute cracks known as crazing? The answer likely lies in variables so slight they were imperceptible even to the masters. A tiny, undetectable shift in the kiln's temperature during the critical cooling phase, a barely measurable difference in the thickness of the glaze application, or a minuscule, undocumented impurity in a batch of quartz could create weaknesses in the glass over centuries. The tiles we see on mosque walls are the triumphant survivors, the perfect results of a process that had a shockingly narrow margin for error. The ones that failed dramatically shattered in the kiln. The ones that failed subtly are slowly fading away, their once vibrant hues yielding to time in a silent, centuries-long retreat. These lingering questions are what make the study of Iznik tiles so dynamically alive today. Every new technological advance offers another chance to peer deeper into their secrets. Imagine a future where advanced AI can analyze thousands of spectral signatures from tiles across the globe, cross-referencing chemical compositions with architectural records to pinpoint the exact workshop and even the specific year a tile was made. Non-invasive spectroscopy techniques are becoming so refined that soon we may be able to analyze the chemical makeup of a tile in a museum without ever touching it, simply by scanning its surface with a handheld device. This could allow for the comprehensive mapping of entire buildings, revealing which tiles are original and which are later restorations, and perhaps even identifying the individual hands of different master painters based on their unique chemical signature in the pigment mix. The most exciting possibility is that a lost document may still await discovery. Could a forgotten chest in the basement of Topkapi Palace, or a long-sealed archive in a former Ottoman province, contain that mythical recipe book or the detailed workshop journals of a master usta? The discovery of a single page of notes, with precise weights and measures for the clay mix or the exact duration of a firing, would be akin to finding a lost symphony by Mozart. It would completely rewrite our understanding of this art form and provide the missing key to secrets we've only begun to guess at. The story of Iznik isn't a closed book resting on a museum shelf. It's a living narrative with future chapters waiting to be unearthed, promising that the next great discovery could be just one shovel strike or one technological breakthrough away. As we reach the end of our journey, it's worth pausing to consider the true legacy of these magnificent creations. The greatest secret of Ottoman tile art isn't found in a single lost recipe or a hidden mineral. It's the breathtaking convergence of all the elements we've explored. It was the perfect marriage of Iznik's unique quartz-rich clay, the mastery of nomadic chemists who understood the alchemy of pigments, and the visionary designers of the imperial court who weaved spiritual and poetic meaning into every brushstroke. This wasn't a solo performance, but a grand symphony of human ingenuity, where geologists, traders, artists, and architects each played an indispensable part in a process so complex that its pinnacle has never been fully replicated. These tiles stand today not merely as beautiful decorations, but as a powerful testament to human creativity and endurance. They have outlasted the empire that commissioned them, surviving wars, earthquakes, and centuries of neglect, because the very process that created them was a form of immortality. The colors are literally locked within the glass of the glaze, a moment of 17th century fire frozen in time for us to witness. They remind us that true artistry is not just about aesthetics. It is about solving profound problems: how to capture the sky in a piece of rock, how to make a wall radiate divine light, how to express the most complex spiritual ideas without a single written word. In an age of mass production and disposable objects, these hand-crafted masterpieces challenge us to value the slow, the deliberate, and the exquisitely made. I'd love to hear how this story has resonated with you. Perhaps you've been fortunate enough to stand in the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, feeling the awe of that luminous space firsthand. Maybe you've spotted an Iznik-inspired pattern in an unexpected place, from a fabric design to a piece of modern architecture. Share your own experiences and observations in the comments below. Let's create a gallery of modern appreciation for this ancient art form. If this exploration has sparked your curiosity, the adventure doesn't have to end here. Seek out the collections in great museums like the Victoria and Albert in London or the Louvre in Paris, where you can come face to face with these treasures. Read about the poets like Rumi and Hafiz, whose verses inspired the floral designs, or delve into the architectural genius of Mimar Sinan. Each tile is a doorway, and once you know its language, you'll start to see its influence everywhere, a timeless beauty that continues to inspire and